What is the largest vein in the human body?
The largest vein in the human body is the inferior vena cava. The vein that returns blood from the lower half of the body back to the heart.
Does the United States currently produce enough energy to meet its consumption needs?
No. From 1958 forward, the United States has consumed more energy than it has produced. And the difference has been met by energy imports. In 2008, 73.71 quadrillion BTUs was the total United States energy production. In that same year 99.30 quadrillion BTUs were consumed.
What was the contribution to medical science of a dog named Marjorie?
Marjorie was a diabetic black and white mongrel that was the first creature to be kept alive by insulin, a substance that controls the level of sugar in the blood.
What is the purpose of goosebumps?
The puckering of the skin that takes place when goose flesh is formed is the result of contraction of the muscle fibers in the skin. This muscular activity will produce more heat, and raises the temperature of the body.
How much space does a recycled ton of paper save in a landfill?
Each ton, 907 kilograms, saves more than 3 cubic yards of landfill space. In addition, recycling 1 ton, 907 kilograms, of cardboard saves 9 cubic yards of landfill space.
What are the parts of a flower?
Sepal found on the outside of the bud or on the underside of the open flower. It serves to protect the flower bud from drying out. Some sepals ward off predators by their spines or chemicals. Petals serve to attract pollinators and are usually dropped shortly after pollination occurs. Nectar contains varying amounts of sugar and proteins that can be secreted by any of the floral organs. It usually collects inside the flower cup near the base of the cup formed by the flower parts. Stamen is the male part of a flower and consists of a filament and anther where pollen is produced. Pistil is the female part, which consists of the stigma, style, and ovary containing ovules. After fertilization, the ovules mature into seeds.
What organs are included in the integumentary system?
The integumentary system, from the Latin integere, meaning to cover, includes skin, hair, glands, and nails. The main function of the integumentary system is to provide the body with a protective barrier between the organs inside the body and the changing environment outside.
Why are eye transplants not available?
The eye's retina is part of the brain, and the retina cells are derived from the optic nerve in the brain. Retinal cells and the cells that connect them to the brain are the least amenable to being manipulated outside the body. Implantable cardioverter defibrillator monitors heart rhythms. When it senses irregular rhythms, it delivers shocks so the heart beats in a regular rhythm.
How large is the solar system?
The size of the solar system can be visualized by imagining the Sun, 864,000 miles in diameter. 1,380,000 kilometers, shrunk to a diameter of 1 inch, about the size of a ping-pong ball. Using the same size scale, Earth would be a speck 0.01 inches, 0.25 millimeters in diameter and about 9 feet, 2.7 meters, away from the ping-pong ball-sized Sun. Our Moon would have a diameter of 0.0025 inches, 0.06 millimeters, the thickness of a human hair, and only a little over 1/4 inch, 6.3 millimeters, from Earth. Jupiter, the largest planet in the solar system, appears as the size of a small pea. 0.1 inches 2.5 millimeters in diameter, and 46 feet, 14 meters, from the Sun.
What is STP?
The abbreviation STP is often used for standard temperature and pressure. As a matter of convenience, scientists have chosen a specific temperature and pressure as standards for comparing gas volumes. The standard temperature is 0 degrees Celsius 273 degrees Kelvin and the standard pressure is 760 torr, 1 atmosphere.
What is wind shear?
Wind shear refers to rapid changes in wind speed and or direction over short distances, and is usually associated with thunderstorms. It is especially dangerous to aircraft.
What is a hacker?
A hacker is a skilled computer user. The term originally denoted a skilled programmer. 5. Particularly one skilled in machine code and with a good knowledge of the machine and its operating system. The name arose from the fact that a good programmer could always hack an unsatisfactory system around until it worked. The term later came to denote a user whose main interest is in defeating secure systems. The term has thus acquired a pejorative sense, with the meaning of one who deliberately and sometimes criminally interferes with data available through telephone lines. The activities of such hackers have led to considerable efforts to tighten security of transmitted data. The hacker ethic is that information sharing is the proper way of human dealing, and, indeed, it is the responsibility of hackers to liberally impart their wisdom to the software world by distributing information. Many hackers are hired by companies to test their web security.
What is the pH scale?
The pH scale is the measurement of the H1 concentration, hydrogen ions, in a solution. It is used to measure the acidity or alkalinity of a solution. The pH scale ranges from 0 to 14. A neutral solution has a pH of 7, one with a pH greater than 7 is basic or alkaline, and one with a pH less than 7 is acidic. The lower the pH below 7, the more acidic the solution. Each whole number drop in pH represents a tenfold increase in acidity.
How many volts are in lightning?
A stroke of lightning discharges from 10 to 100 million volts of electricity. An average lightning stroke has 30,000 amperes.
How does a search engine work?
Internet search engines are akin to computerized card catalogs at libraries. They provide a hyperlinked listing of locations on the World Wide Web. According to the requested keyword or pattern of words submitted by the searcher. A search engine uses computer software called spiders or bots to automatically search out, inventory, and index web pages. The spiders scan each web page's content for words and the frequency of the words, then stores that information in a database. When the user submits words or terms, the search engine returns a list of sites from the database and ranks them according to the relevancy of the search terms.
What are the greenhouse gases?
Scientists recognize carbon dioxide, CO2, methane, CH4, chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, nitrous oxide, N20, and water vapor as significant greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases account for less than 1% of Earth's atmosphere. These gases trap heat in Earth's atmosphere, preventing the heat from escaping back into space. Human activities, such as using gasoline in automobiles for fuel. Account for the release of carbon dioxide and nitrogen oxides.
What was the Scopes monkey trial?
John T. Scopes, 1900 to 1970, a high school biology teacher, was brought to trial by the state of Tennessee in 1925 for teaching the theory of evolution. He challenged a recent law passed by the Tennessee legislature that made it unlawful to teach in any public school any theory that denied the divine creation of man. He was convicted and sentenced, but the decision was reversed later and the law repealed in 1967. In the early 21st century, pressure against school boards still affects the teaching of evolution. Recent drives by anti-evolutionists either have tried to ban the teaching of evolution or have demanded equal time for special creation as described in the biblical book of Genesis. This has raised many questions about the separation of church and state, the teaching of controversial subjects in public schools, and the ability of scientists to communicate with the public. The gradual improvement of the fossil record, the result of comparative anatomy, and many other developments in biological science have contributed toward making evolutionary thinking more palatable. Many rock fossils either erode before they can be discovered, or they remain in places inaccessible to scientists. The value of fossils comes not only from the information they give us about the structures of those once living organisms, but the placement of common fossils in the geologic layers also gives researchers a method for dating other, lesser known, samples.
What is cannel coal?
Cannel coal is a type of coal that possesses some of the properties of petroleum. Valued primarily for its quick-firing qualities, it burns with a long, luminous flame. It is made up of coal-like material mixed with clay and shale. And it may also look like black shale, being compact and dull black in color.
Which endocrine glands produce which hormones?
Each endocrine gland produces specific hormones, as explained in the below table.
Do seedless watermelons occur naturally?
Seedless watermelon was first introduced in 1988 after 50 years of research. A seedless watermelon plant requires pollen from a seeded watermelon plant. Farmers frequently plant seeded and seedless plants close together and depend on bees to pollinate the seedless plants. The white seeds, also known as pods, found in seedless watermelons serve to hold a fertilized egg and embryo. Because a seedless melon is sterile and fertilization cannot take place. Pods do not harden and become a black seed, as occurs in seeded watermelons.
What is a golden section?
Golden section, also called the divine proportion, is the division of a line segment so that the ratio of the whole segment to the larger part is equal to the ratio of the larger part to the smaller part. The ratio is approximately 1.61803 to 1. The number 1.61803 is called the golden number, also called phi with a capital P. The golden number is the limit of the ratios of consecutive Fibonacci numbers, such as, for instance, 21/13 and 34/21. A golden rectangle is one whose length and width correspond to this ratio. The ancient Greeks thought this shape had the most pleasing proportions. Many famous painters have used the golden rectangle in their paintings. And architects have used it in their design of buildings, the most famous example being the Greek Parthenon.
Which species have become extinct since the Endangered Species Act was passed in 1973?
Nine domestic species have become extinct.
Are there more chemical compounds with even numbers of carbon atoms than with odd?
A team of chemists recently noted that the database of the Beilstein Information System, containing over 9.6 million organic compounds, includes significantly more substances with an even number of carbon atoms than with an odd number. Statistical analyses of smaller sets of organic compounds, such as the Cambridge Crystallographic Database or the CRC Handbook of Chemistry and Physics, led to the same results. A possible explanation for the observed asymmetry might be that organic compounds are ultimately derived from biological sources, and nature frequently utilized acetate, a C2 building block, in its syntheses of organic compounds. It may therefore be that the manufacturers and synthetic chemists' preferential use of relatively economical starting materials derived from natural sources has left permanent traces in chemical publications and databases.
Who is the only U.S. president to receive a patent?
On May 22, 1849, 12 years before he became the 16th U.S. president, Abraham Lincoln, 1809 to 1865, was granted U.S. Patent Number 6,469 for a device to help steamboats pass over shoals and sandbars. The device, never tested or manufactured, had a set of adjustable buoyancy chambers. Made from metal and waterproof cloth, attached to the ship's sides below the water line. Bellows could fill the chambers with air to float the vessel over the shoals and sandbars. It was the only patent ever held by a United States president.
What is heavy water?
Heavy water, also called deuterium oxide, D20, is composed of oxygen and two hydro-8 atoms in the form of deuterium, which has about twice the mass of normal hydrogen. As a result, heavy water has a molecular weight of about 20, while ordinary water has a molecular weight of about 18. Approximately 1 part heavy water can be found in 6,500 parts of ordinary water, and it may be extracted by fractional distillation. It is used in thermonuclear weapons and nuclear reactors and as an isotopic tracer in studies of chemical and biochemical processes. Heavy water was discovered by Harold C. Urey, 1893–1981, in 1931. He received the Nobel Prize in chemistry in 1934 for his discovery of heavy hydrogen.
Which planets are called inferior planets and which are superior planets?
An inferior planet is one whose orbit is nearer to the Sun than Earth's orbit is. Mercury and Venus are the inferior planets. Superior planets are those whose orbits around the Sun lie beyond that of Earth. Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune are the superior planets. The terms have nothing to do with the quality of an individual planet.
How are genes physically found in a specific genome?
Finding one gene out of a possible 30,000 to 40,000 genes in the human genome is a difficult task. However, the process is made easier if the protein product of the gene is known. As an example, if a researcher is looking to find the gene for mouse hemoglobin, he or she would isolate the hemoglobin from mouse blood and determine the amino acid sequence. The amino acid sequence could then be used as a template to generate the nucleotide sequence. Working backward again, a complementary DNA probe to the sequence would be used to identify DNA molecules with the same sequence from the entire mouse genomic library.
How are seedless grapes grown?
Since seedless grapes cannot reproduce in the manner that grapes usually do, i.e., dropping seeds, growers have to take cuttings from the plants, root them, and then plant the plant cuttings. Seedless grapes come from a naturally occurring mutation in which the hard seed casing fails to develop. Although the exact origin of seedless grapes is unknown, They might have been first cultivated thousands of years ago in present-day Iran or Afghanistan. Currently, 90% of all raisins are made from Thompson seedless grapes.
What is an astrolabe?
Invented by the Greeks or Alexandrians around 100 B. CE, an astrolabe is a two-dimensional working model of the heavens, with sites for observations. It consists of two concentric, flat disks, one fixed, representing the observer on Earth, the other moving, which can be rotated to represent the appearance of the celestial sphere at a given moment. Given latitude, date, and time, the observer can read off the altitude and azimuth of the Sun, the brightest stars, and the planets. By measuring the altitude of a particular body, one can find the time. The astrolabe can also be used to find times of sunrise, sunset, twilight, or the height of a tower or depth of a well. After 1600, it was replaced by the sextant and other more accurate instruments.
Which industries release the most toxic chemicals?
The metal mining industry released the most toxic chemicals for the year 2008. Accounting for 30% of total chemical releases.
Is it true that the rotation speed of Earth varies?
The rotation speed is at its maximum in late July and early August and at its minimum in April. The difference in the length of the day is about 0.0012 second. Since about 1900, Earth's rotation has been slowing at a rate of approximately 1.7 seconds per year. In the geologic past, Earth's rotational period was much faster. Days were shorter and there were more days in the year. About 350 million years ago, the year had 400 to 410 days. 280 million years ago, a year was 390 days long.
What are the major parts of vascular plants?
Vascular plants consist of roots, shoots, and leaves. The root system penetrates the soil and is below ground. The shoot system consists of the stem and the leaves. The root system is the part of the plant below ground level. It consists of the roots that absorb water and various ions necessary for plant nutrition. The root system anchors the plant in the ground. The shoot system is the part of the plant above ground level. It consists of the stem and leaves. The stem provides the framework for the positioning of the leaves. The leaves are the sites of photosynthesis.
How is the glass used in movie stunts made?
The glass might be made of candy, sugar boiled down to a translucent pane, or plastic. This looks like glass and will shatter like glass, but will not cut a performer.
How are bacteria cultured?
Bacteria are usually cultured in petri dishes that contain a culture medium, usually nutrient agar. Petri dishes were developed in 1887 by Julius Richard Petrie, 1852 to 1921. A member of Robert Koch's laboratory. The top of the dish is larger than the bottom so that when the dish is closed a strong seal is created, preventing contamination of the culture. Agar was developed as a culture media for bacteria by Robert Koch. Koch was interested in the isolation of bacteria in pure culture. Because isolation was difficult in liquid media, he began to study ways in which bacteria could be grown on solid media. After sterile, boiled potatoes proved unsatisfactory, a better alternative was suggested by Fanny E. Hesse, 1850 to 1934, the wife of Walther Hesse, 1846 to 1911, who was one of Koch's assistants. She suggested that agar, which she had used to thicken sauces, jams, and jellies, be used to solidify liquid nutrient broth. Agar is generally inexpensive and, once gelled, does not melt until reaching a temperature of 212 degrees Fahrenheit 100 degrees Celsius. If 1 to 2 grams of agar are added to 100 milliliter of nutrient broth, it produces a solid medium that is not degraded by most bacteria. Stacks of petri dishes culturing bacteria are one of the most common items in a microbiology laboratory.
How and when was coal formed?
Coal is formed from the remains of plants that have undergone a series of far-reaching changes, turning into a substance called peat, which subsequently was buried. Through millions of years, Earth's crust buckled and folded, subjecting the peat deposits to very high pressure and changing the deposits into coal. The Carboniferous, or coal-bearing, period occurred about 250 million years ago. Geologists in the United States sometimes divide this period into the Mississippian and the Pennsylvanian periods. Most of the high-grade coal deposits are to be found in the strata of the Pennsylvanian period.
What are the Platonic solids?
The Platonic solids are the 5 regular polyhedra, the 4-sided tetrahedron, the 6-sided cube or hexahedron, the 8-sided octahedron, the 12-sided dodecahedron, and the 20-sided icosahedron. although they had been studied as long ago as the time of Pythagoras, around 500 BCE. They are called the Platonic solids because they were first described in detail by Plato, 427 to 347 BCE. Around 400 BCE, the ancient Greeks gave mystical significance to the Platonic solids. The tetrahedron represented fire. The icosahedron represented water, the stable cube represented the earth, the octahedron represented the air. The 12 faces of the dodecahedron corresponded to the 12 signs of the zodiac. And this figure represented the entire universe.
What were Aristotle's contributions to anatomy?
Aristotle, 384 to 322 B. CE, wrote several works laying the foundations for comparative anatomy, taxonomy, and embryology. He investigated carefully all kinds of animals, including humans. His works on life sciences, on sense and sensible objects, on memory and recollection, on sleep and waking, on dreams, on divination by dreams, on length and shortness of life, on youth and age, and on respiration, are collectively called parva naturalia.
What is the difference between short-day plants and long-day plants?
Short-day and long-day plants exhibit a response to photoperiodism, or the changes in light and dark in a 24-hour cycle. Short-day plants form flowers when the days become shorter than a critical length, while long-day plants form flowers when the days become longer than a critical length. Short-day plants bloom in late summer or autumn in middle latitudes. Examples of short-day plants are chrysanthemums, goldenrods, poinsettias, soybeans, and ragweed. Long-day plants bloom in spring and early summer. Some examples of long-day plants are clover, irises, and hollyhocks. Florists and commercial plant growers can adjust the amount of light a plant receives to force it to bloom out of season.
What was the first National Science Institute?
On March 3, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signed a congressional charter creating the National Academy of Sciences, which stipulated that the Academy shall, whenever called upon by any department of the government, investigate, examine, experiment, and report upon any subject of science or art. The actual expense of such investigations, examinations, experiments, and reports to be paid from appropriations which may be made for the purpose. But the Academy shall receive no compensation whatever for any services to the government of the United States. The Academy's first president was Alexander Dallas Back, 1806 to 1867. Today, the Academy and its sister organizations, the National Academy of Engineering, established in 1964, and the Institute of Medicine, established in 1970, serve as the country's preeminent sources of advice on science and technology and their bearing on the nation's welfare. The National Research Council was established in 1916 by the National Academy of Sciences at the request of President Woodrow Wilson, 1856–1924, to bring into cooperation existing governmental, educational, industrial, and other research organizations, with the object of encouraging the investigation of natural phenomena. The increased use of scientific research in the development of American industries. The employment of scientific methods in strengthening the national defense. And such other applications of science as will promote the national security and welfare. The National Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Engineering, and the Institute of Medicine work through the National Research Council of the United States, one of world's most important advisory bodies. More than 6,000 scientists, engineers, industrialists, and health and other professionals participating in numerous committees comprise the National Research Council.
When was the first curbside recycling program established in the United States?
The first municipal-wide curbside recycling program was started in 1974 in University City, Missouri, where city officials designed and distributed a container for collecting newspapers. As of 2008, there were 659 curbside recycling programs serving 59% of the total population in the United States.
Who is associated with developing the concept of wind chill?
The Antarctic explorer Paul A. Sippel, 1908–1968, coined the term wind chill in his 1939 dissertation. Adaptation of the explorer to the climate of Antarctica. Sippel was the youngest member of Admiral Richard Byrd's Antarctica expedition in 1928–1930. And later made other trips to the Antarctic as part of Byrd's staff. And for the U.S. Department of the Interior assigned to the U.S. Antarctic Expedition. He also served in many other endeavors related to the study of cold climates.
Are all snowflakes shaped alike?
Some snowflakes may have strikingly similar shapes, but these twins are probably not molecularly identical. In 1986, cloud physicist Nancy Knight believed she found a uniquely cloned pair of crystals on an oil-coated slide that had been hanging from an airplane. This pair may have been the result of breaking off from a star crystal, or were attached side by side, thereby experiencing the same weather conditions simultaneously. Unfortunately, the smaller aspects of each of the snow crystals could not be studied because the photograph was unable to capture possible molecular differences. So, even if the human eye may see twin flakes, on a minuscule level these flakes are different.
What antidote is available for mushroom poisoning?
No effective antidote for human poisoning by mushrooms has been discovered. The toxins produced by mushrooms accumulate in the liver and lead to irreversible liver damage. Unfortunately, there may be no indication of poisoning for several hours after ingesting a toxic mushroom. When the symptoms do present, they often resemble typical food poisoning. Liver failure becomes apparent 3 to 6 days after ingesting the poisonous mushroom. Oftentimes a liver transplant may be the only possible treatment.
Can animals regenerate parts of their bodies?
Regeneration does occur in some animals, however. It progressively declines the more complex the animal species becomes. Among primitive invertebrates, lacking a backbone, regeneration frequently occurs. For example, a planarium, flatworm, can split symmetrically, each part becoming a clone of the other. In higher invertebrates regeneration occurs in echinoderms, such as starfish, and arthropods, such as insects and crustaceans. Regeneration of appendages, limbs, wings, and antennae, occurs in insects, such as cockroaches, fruit flies, and locusts, and in crustaceans, such as lobsters, crabs, and crayfish. For example, regeneration of the crayfish's missing claw occurs at its next molt. Shedding of its hard cuticle exterior shell/skin for the growing and the subsequent hardening of a new cuticle exterior. However, sometimes the regenerated claw does not achieve the same size of the missing claw. But after every molt, occurring 2 to 3 times a year, it grows and will eventually become nearly as large as the original claw. On a very limited basis, some amphibians and reptiles can replace a lost leg or tail.
Where are viruses found?
Viruses lie dormant in any environment, land, soil, air, and on any material. They infect every type of cell, plant, animal, bacterial, and fungal.
Which scientists made important discoveries associated with the cell?
In the late 1600s, Robert Hooke, 1635 to 1703, was the first to see a cell. Initially in a section of cork, and then in bones and plants. In 1824, Henry Dutrochet, 1776 to 1847, proposed that animals and plants had similar cell structures. Robert Brown, 1773 to 1858, discovered the cell nucleus in 1831, and Matthias Schleiden, 1804 to 1881, named the nucleolus. The structure within the nucleus now known to be involved in the production of ribosomes, around that time. Schleiden and Theodor Schwann, 1810 to 1882, described a general cell theory in 1839. The former stating that cells were the basic unit of plants and Schwann extending the idea to animals. Robert Remak, 1815 to 1865, was the first to describe cell division in 1855. Chromosomes were named and observed in the nucleus of a cell in 1888 by Wilhelm von Waldein-Hartz, 1836 to 1921. Walther Fleming, 1843 to 1905. Was the first individual to follow chromosomes through the entire process of cell division.
Where are the world's highest tides?
The Bay of Fundy, New Brunswick, Canada, has the world's highest tides. They average about 45 feet, 14 meters, high in the northern part of the bay, far surpassing the world average of 2.5 feet, 0.8 meter. The shape and size of the bay, as well as the increasing up bay shallowness, cause these very high tides.
What is genetic engineering?
Genetic engineering, also known popularly as molecular cloning or gene cloning, is the artificial recombination of nucleic acid molecules in the test tube, their insertion into a virus, bacterial plasmid, or other vector system, and the subsequent incorporation of the chimeric molecules into a host organism in which they are capable of continued propagation. The construction of such molecules has also been termed gene manipulation because it usually involves the production of novel genetic combinations by biochemical means. Genetic engineering techniques include cell fusion and the use of recombinant DNA, RNA, or gene splicing. In cell fusion, the tough outer membranes of sperm and egg cells are stripped off by enzymes. And then the fragile cells are mixed and combined with the aid of chemicals or viruses. The result may be the creation of a new life form from two species. Recombinant DNA techniques transfer a specific genetic activity from one organism to the next through the use of bacterial plasmids. Small circular pieces of DNA lying outside the main bacterial chromosome. And enzymes, such as restriction endonucleases, which cut the DNA strands, reverse transcriptase, which makes a DNA strand from an RNA strand, DNA ligase, which joins DNA strands together, and tag polymerase, which can make a double-stranded DNA molecule from a single-stranded primer molecule. The process begins with the isolation of suitable DNA strands and fragmenting them. After these fragments are combined with vectors, they are carried into bacterial cells where the DNA fragments are spliced onto plasmid DNA that has been opened up. These hybrid plasmids are now mixed with host cells to form transformed cells. since only some of the transformed cells will exhibit the desired characteristic or gene activity. The transformed cells are separated and grown individually in cultures. This methodology has been successful in producing large quantities of hormones, such as insulin, for the biotechnology industry. However, it is more difficult to transform animal and plant cells. Yet the technique exists to make plants resistant to diseases and to make animals grow larger. Because genetic engineering interferes with the processes of heredity and can alter the genetic structure of our own species, there is much concern over the ethical ramifications of such power, as well as the possible health and ecological consequences of the creation of these bacterial forms. Some applications of genetic engineering in the various fields are listed below. Agriculture crops having larger yields, disease and drought resistancy. Bacterial sprays to prevent crop damage from freezing temperatures, and livestock improvement through changes in animal traits. Industry use of bacteria to convert old newspaper and wood chips into sugar. Oil and toxin-absorbing bacteria for oil spill or toxic waste cleanups, and yeasts to accelerate wine fermentation. Medicine alteration of human genes to eliminate disease, experimental stage. Faster and more economical production of vital human substances to alleviate deficiency and disease symptoms, but not to cure them, such as insulin, interferon. Cancer therapy, vitamins, human growth hormone ADA, antibodies, vaccines, and antibiotics. Research modification of gene structure in medical research, especially cancer research. Food processing rennin, enzyme, in cheese aging.
At what age does sperm production begin?
Sperm production begins with the onset of puberty, usually between ages 11 to 14 in boys. It continues throughout the life of an adult male. It is estimated that during his lifetime a normal male will produce as many as 300 million sperm per day.
What are the essential nutrient elements required for plant growth?
Essential nutrients are chemical elements that are necessary for plant growth. An element is essential for plant growth when, 1. It is required for a plant to complete its life cycle. To produce viable seeds, 2. It is part of a molecule or component of the plant that is itself essential to the plant, such as the magnesium in the chlorophyll molecule. And the plant displays symptoms of deficiency in the absence of the element. Essential nutrients are also referred to as essential minerals and essential inorganic nutrients.
What is sterling silver?
Sterling silver is a high-grade alloy that contains a minimum of 925 parts in 1000 of silver. 92.5% silver and 7.5% of another metal, usually copper.
What does it mean to boot a computer?
Booting a computer is starting it, in the sense of turning control over to the operating system. The term comes from bootstrap. Because bootstraps allow an individual to pull on boots without help from anyone else. Some people prefer to think of the process in terms of using bootstraps to lift oneself off the ground. Impossible in the physical sense, but a reasonable image for representing the process of searching for the operating system, loading it, and passing control to it. The commands to do this are embedded in a read-only memory, ROM, chip that is automatically executed when a microcomputer is turned on or reset. In mainframe or mini computers, the process usually involves a great deal of operator input. A cold boot powers on the computer and passes control to the operating system. A warm boot resets the operating system without powering off the computer.
How does snow form?
Snow is not frozen rain. Snow forms by sublimation of water vapor, the turning of water vapor directly into ice, without going through the liquid stage. High above the ground, chilled water vapor turns to ice when its temperature reaches the dew point. The result of this sublimation is a crystal of ice, usually hexagonal. Snow begins in the form of these tiny hexagonal ice crystals in the high clouds. The young crystals are the seeds from which snowflakes will grow. As water vapor is pumped up into the air by updrafts, more water is deposited on the ice crystals, causing them to grow. Soon some of the larger crystals fall to the ground as snowflakes.
How did the introduction of the potato to Europe lead to a devastating famine in Ireland?
The white potato, Solanum tuberosum, native to South America, was first introduced to Spain in the middle of the 16th century. It was not widely accepted as a food crop since European relatives of the potato, such as nightshade, mandrake, and henbane, were known to be poisonous or hallucinogenic. In fact, all of the above ground parts of a potato plant are poisonous and only the tuber is edible. The potato was established as a food crop in Ireland as early as 1625 and became a staple of the diet, especially among the poor, during the 18th and early 19th centuries. The widespread dependence on potatoes as a main source of food led to massive starvation. When the plant pathogen Phytophthora infestans destroyed potato fields in the 1840s, over 1 million Irish people died from starvation or subsequent disease. Another 1.5 million emigrated from Ireland.
What is the precession of the equinoxes?
The precession of the equinoxes is the 26,000-year circular movement of Earth's axis. It is caused by the bulging at the equator, which makes Earth's axis twist in such a way that the north and south poles complete a circle every 26,000 years. Every year when the Sun crosses the equator at the time of the equinox, it is in a slightly different position than the previous year. This movement proceeds eastward until a circle is completed.
How is mutation rate calculated?
The mutation rate is generally expressed as the number of mutations per cell divisions, per gamete, or per round of replication.
What groups of reptiles are living today?
The three orders of reptiles that are alive today are, 1. Chelonia, which includes turtles, terrapins, and tortoises; 2. Squamata, which includes lizards and snakes; and 3. Crocodilia, which includes crocodiles and alligators.
What is electrophoresis?
Electrophoresis is a technique used to separate biological molecules, such as nucleic acids, carbohydrates, and amino acids, based on their movement due to the influence of a direct electric current in a buffered solution. Positively charged molecules move toward the negative electrode, while negatively charged molecules move toward the positive electrode.
What is the largest invertebrate?
The largest invertebrate is the giant squid, Archaeoteuthis dux, which averages 30 to 53 feet, 9 to 16 meters, in length including its tentacles. It may reach a length of 69 feet, 21 meters. These animals have the largest eyes, up to 10 inches, 25 centimeters, in diameter, in the animal kingdom. It is believed that they generally live on or near the ocean bottom at a depth of 3,281 feet. 1,000 meters, or slightly more than a half-mile below the surface of the sea. Standard reference work throughout Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries.
What are the highest and lowest elevations in the United States?
Named in honor of U.S. President William McKinley, 1843 to 1901, MT. McKinley, Alaska, at 20,320 feet, 6,194 meters. is the highest point in the United States and North America. Located in central Alaska, it is part of the Alaska Range. Its south peak measures 20,320 feet, 6,194 meters high, and the north peak is 19,470 feet, 5,931 meters high. It boasts one of the world's largest unbroken precipices, and is the main scenic attraction at Denali National Park. Denali means the High One or the Great One and is a Native American name sometimes used for Mt. McKinley. Mt. Whitney, California, at 14,494 feet. 4,421 meters, is the highest point in the continental United States. Death Valley, California, at 282 feet, 86 meters, below sea level, is the lowest point in the United States and in the Western Hemisphere.
Which volcanoes have been the most destructive?
The 5 most destructive eruptions from volcanoes since 1700 are as follows.
How much fuel can be saved when a home is properly insulated?
Insulation of a single-family house with EPS or XPS, extruded polystyrene. Over a 50-year period has the potential to save 80 metric tons of heating oil. This in turn corresponds to the fuel consumption of a fully loaded jumbo jet during a flight from Frankfurt, Germany, to New York.
Which sport has the highest rate of injuries and what kind of injury is most common?
Football players suffer more injuries than other athletes, collectively. They have 12 times as many injuries as do basketball players, who have the next highest rate of injury. Knee problems are the most common type of injury, with 2/3 of basketball players' injuries and 1/3 of football players' injuries being knee-related.
Who was the first physician to use chemotherapy as a medical treatment?
Chemotherapy is the use of chemical substances to treat diseases, specifically malignant diseases. The drug must interfere with the growth of bacterial, parasitic, or tumor cells, without significantly affecting host cells. Especially effective in types of cancers such as leukemia and lymphoma. Chemotherapy was introduced in medicine by the German physician Paul Ehrlich, 1854 to 1915.
What is the origin of the term hurricane?
The term hurricane is derived from hurricane, the Carib god of evil, which was derived from the Mayan god Hurricán. Hurricán was one of the Mayan creator gods, who blew his breath across the chaotic water and brought forth dry land.
What is a tsunami?
A tsunami is a giant wave set in motion by a large earthquake occurring under or near the ocean that causes the ocean floor to shift vertically. This vertical shift pushes the water ahead of it, starting a tsunami. These are very long waves. 100 to 200 miles, 161 to 322 kilometers, with high speeds, 500 miles per hour, 805 kilometers per hour, that, when approaching shallow water, can grow into a 100-foot, 30.5 meter, high wave as its wavelength is reduced abruptly. Ocean earthquakes below a magnitude of 6.5 on the Richter scale, and those that shift the seafloor only horizontally, do not produce these destructive waves. The highest recorded tsunami was 1,719 feet, 524 meters, high along Lituya Bay, Alaska. On July 9, 1958. Caused by a giant landslip, it moved at 100 miles, 161 kilometers, per hour. This wave would have swamped the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, which are 1,483 feet, 452 meters, high.
Why do deep-sea divers get the bends?
Bends is a painful condition in the limbs and abdomen. It is caused by the formation and enlargement of bubbles of nitrogen in blood and tissues as a result of rapid reduction of pressure. This condition can develop when a diver ascends too rapidly after being exposed to increased pressure. Severe pain will develop in the muscles and joints of the arms and legs. More severe symptoms include vertigo, nausea, vomiting, choking, shock, and sometimes death. Bends is also known as decompression sickness, caisson disease, tunnel disease, and diver's paralysis. A variety of organisms have been shown to cause PID, including Neisseria gonorrhoeae and such. Common bacteria as Staphylococci, Chlamydia, and coliforms, Pseudomonas and Escherichia coli. Signs and symptoms of PID vary with the site of the infection, but usually include profuse, purulent vaginal discharge, low-grade fever, and malaise, especially within gonorrhoeae infections, and lower abdominal pain. PID is treated with antibiotics. An early diagnosis and treatment will prevent damage to the reproductive system. Severe, untreated PID can result in the development of a pelvic abscess that requires drainage. A ruptured pelvic abscess is a potentially fatal complication, and a patient who develops this complication may require a total hysterectomy.
When were microfibers invented?
Microfibers are very fine fibers with a diameter of less than 1 denier. Denier is the term used to describe the diameter or fineness of a fiber. It is the weight in grams of a 9,000 meter, 9,842 yards, length of fiber. Many microfibers are 0.5 to 0.6 denier. As a comparison, microfibers are 100 times finer than human hair and half the diameter of a fine silk fiber. The first microfiber fabric was ultrasuede, TM. Created by Masashi Okamoto in 1970 at Toray Industries in Japan. His colleague, Toyohiko Hakoda, perfected the process to create a soft, supple, stain-resistant fabric.
What is phytoremediation?
Phytoremediation, a newer green technology, is the use of green plants to remove pollutants from the soil or render them harmless. Certain plants, such as alpine pennycress, Thalassopycera lescens, have been identified as metal hyperaccumulators. Researchers have found that these plants can grow in soils contaminated with toxic heavy metals, including cadmium, zinc, and nickel. The plants extract the toxic heavy metals from the soil and concentrate them in the stems, shoots, and leaves. These plant tissues may then be collected and disposed of in a hazardous waste landfill. Researchers are investigating ways to recover the metals by extracting them from the plants. Although phytoremediation is limited by how deep the roots of the plants grow in the soil, it is a less costly alternative way to clean up hazardous waste sites.
What is cashmere?
Kashmir goats, which live high in the plateaus of the area from northern China to Mongolia, are covered in a coarse outer hair that helps protect them from the cold, harsh weather. As insulation, these goats have a softer, finer layer of hair or down under the coarse outer hair. This fine hair is shed annually and processed to make cashmere. Each goat produces enough cashmere to make one sweater every 4 years.
Which is stronger, steel or the silk from a spider's web?
Spider silk is stronger. Well known for its strength and elasticity, the strongest spider silk has tensile strength, second only to fused quartz fibers and 5 times greater than that of steel of equivalent weight. Tensile strength is the longitudinal stress that a substance can bear without tearing apart.
When was spontaneous combustion first recognized?
Spontaneous combustion is the ignition of materials stored in bulk. This is due to internal heat buildup caused by oxidation, generally a reaction in which electrons are lost. Specifically when oxygen is combined with a substance, or when hydrogen is removed from a compound. Because this oxidation heat cannot be dissipated into the surrounding air, the temperature of the material rises until the material reaches its ignition point and bursts into flame. A Chinese text written before 290 CE recognized this phenomenon in a description of the ignition of stored oiled cloth. The first Western acknowledgement of spontaneous combustion was by J.P.F. Duhamel in 1757. When he discussed the gigantic conflagration of a stack of oil-soaked canvas sails drying in the July sun. Before spontaneous combustion was recognized, such events were usually blamed on arsonists.
What are the 7 warning signs of Alzheimer's disease?
The 7 warning signs of Alzheimer's disease are: asking the same question over and over again, repeating the same story, word for word, again and again, forgetting how to cook, how to make repairs, how to play cards, or any other activities that were previously done with ease and regularity. Losing one's ability to pay bills or balance one's checkbook, getting lost in familiar surroundings, or misplacing household objects, neglecting to bathe, or wearing the same clothes over and over again, while insisting that one has taken a bath or that clothes are still clean, relying on someone else, such as a spouse. To make decisions, it is important to understand that even if someone has several or even most of these symptoms, it does not mean they definitely have Alzheimer's disease. It does mean they should be thoroughly examined by a medical specialist trained in evaluating memory disorders, such as a neurologist or a psychiatrist, or by a comprehensive memory disorder clinic with an entire team of experts knowledgeable about memory problems.